Yo, Afro Luffy, move over. Move over, fam. Like, you the GOAT. We know this. We know One Piece greatness, all that jazz. But, yo, Afro Deku is coming through, fam. And the strength is real. This chapter by Hero Academia, definitely something very telling. 284, if I'm not mistaken. It's very telling of potentially some foreboding things to happen. Because there was some stuff in here that made me look like, yo, what are you trying to insinuate regarding Deku? A lot of foreshadowing. Big foreshadowing for some potential bad, very, very bad things to happen to Deku moving forward into the future. And also, at the same time, while there's some seemingly foreshadowing for bad things to happen to Deku, there was a really, really powerful moment in there for Bakugo. And again, another changing part of his character. I think out of all the characters, if you're starting to look at it, little by little, Bakugo is starting to develop more and more and becoming one of the most developed. I mean, I'd argue maybe Todoroki developed drastically compared to him, but Bakugo is definitely up there in terms of character development. So a lot to talk about. Deku's new quirk, how he is having a handle of it, like, you know, now 3 quirks at this particular point, like a lot of shit going down, all while we have the great battle against the GOAT, the monster himself, Shigaraki Tomura, fam. So yeah, without further ado, people, let's jump into another chapter of that My Hero Academia greatness, fam. The power is in the fro, baby. Love it. I love it. Let's talk about that.
I say we gonna do what we do, no matter how you move, make your move. That's how it be, though.
Okay, so before we jump into the chapter, just want to quickly note that it is interesting that recently in the author comments, the creator of My Hero Academia did note that he had an editor change. So if we start to notice some changes in the way the story is moving and things are flowing, that could very well be attributed to the fact that a new editor came on board. People don't realize how important editors are to the story. They really shape things, and if something's going to go left, that editor could very well make it go right. So definitely going to keep my eye on how the story moves moving forward, because Horikoshi got a new editor. So the chapter picks up from when the last one left off. Of course, Deku is in the air, got Shigaraki in the air, and yeah, the fight is getting fierce because Deku wants to keep Shigaraki in the air, but Black Whip is still a bit shaky. His control of it is not all the way there, which I'm glad to hear, because at the end of the day, you got to think, like I've said before and I'll say it again, no matter how much training we've had, let's just say as a few months or whatever, it felt as though like majority of the series has been Deku concentrating on the super strength aspect of One For All's quirk, right? Like, because you know, now there's we found out, of course, there's multiple quirks within the quirk. It's a stockpiling quirk essentially, but the super strength part has been one of the main factors throughout the story until, of course, the other quirks were revealed. And it seems as though, like, you know, having those other two, like, this chapter definitely felt as though it was trying to give reasoning behind why he would have some control over these things, but it still was like, okay, yeah, I want to see that he still hasn't perfected it. I want to still see that it's not all the way there yet, because he didn't work on these quirks like he worked on the super strength, or at the very least, we didn't get to see an example of him really struggling. Like, we saw time and time again Deku breaking his freaking arms, and he still don't really have a grasp of it. So having a major grasp on the whip or even the float would be like, come on. And I ain't gonna lie, I felt a little violated when Endeavor sent Shoto. He's like, yo, you go provide first aid, go. I'm like, yo, you really gonna do our boy like that? Like, he's a lot more sufficient than just handling first aid. I mean, don't get me wrong, yeah, people gotta get saved and shit like that, but come on, fam. Like, I didn't want to see that, so I was a little bit like, damn you, Endeavor, damn you, how you gonna send? It's like, yo, we got some real business going on right now. Shoto, go to the store. Shoto, I need some toilet paper. Shoto, like, Endeavor, why? But at the same time, Endeavor feels pathetic. He feels as though he should be the one on the front lines. He's the #1 hero. Like, what the hell is going on? And to a certain degree, yeah. I mean, no matter what, Endeavor's always going to feel a way, like, you know, even this chapter somewhat dives into it yet again for the millionth time, I guess you could say, regarding that he's the #1 hero. And, like, you know, if it was All Might would have been on the front lines. When we saw All For One showed up, it was All Might on the front line. So when his, you know, successor shows up and is terrorizing the world, Endeavor feels like, yo, it should be me. The fact that it's this little squirt that is coming out of nowhere, Deku, it probably is another blow to his ego with all the millions of blows. Thankfully, he has, you know, kind of graduated from that point point of being like just resentful about everything and, you know, desperately angry about a lot of stuff. Of course, we had the arc where he accepted the things with his family and shit like that, so he's not gonna completely be brooding on it, but you gotta imagine, like, that is a slap to the ego yet again of like, god damn, I'm the #1 hero, but little kids first years at UA are doing the damn thing. What's going on? And so Shigaraki proceeds to talk more shit like, oh yeah, you like being in the air? That's perfect, because I'm gonna send your ass to heaven. I'm like, yo, Shigaraki, I love it. I love hearing the shit talking. Like, I don't care, I rocks for Shigaraki, baby. I love to hear him talk his shit. It's like, yes, be the villain that you have continued to portray and talk it. And was it just me, or when Deku was like flying towards Shigaraki and the way his like body was swinging, like the both of them looked like they were about to do fusion. I was about to be like, yo, what the hell we gonna have? Dekuraki, Shigadek? Like, what the fuck were we no, I don't know, it was just the positioning. I mean, the art looks awesome, but it just kind of felt reminiscent of fusion when the bodies are just like flying like, ah! But then we cut to a flashback, and to be honest with you, I felt as though the main purpose of this flashback was two different things. One of which was to excuse and give a reasoning behind how Deku has any sort of handling on some of these quirks, like the float one especially in particular, because he was already with Uraraka and her gravity and trying to understand floating based on her using her quirk on him to float and whatnot. So I think that was one of the main purposes why the flashback was put in here right now, because if not, it would be like, yo, how the fuck he just, you know, float came out of nowhere and all of a sudden he's floating using a whip and super strength. So I think that was one of the main purposes. But there was also something else major regarding the flashback as well, and we'll get into it just in a second, because we see that Deku was training. He had Bakugou there to train with alongside Frog Girl, Sero, and of course Uraraka, which Uraraka was probably the most vital. And it's interesting that the power that Deku has is floats. It's not necessarily like to fly, although it's technically similar to the same thing, and if you master floating, I'm imagining it's basically flying or whatnot. But it is cool in a sense because it also makes more of a bond with Uraraka. But I'm imagining once Uraraka starts to understand like, yo, this dude is floating, probably that'll hurt her in a way of like, man, he doesn't really need me that much anymore. Or it can make her feel like, oh shit, you know, he's so awesome, he even is using my quirk, like shit is crazy. But upon training with Bakugo and the explosions, due to Deku's of course asking of like, yo, take it serious and shit like that, Deku having the afro, and I love it, it brings it back to Afro Luffy, like that was pretty freaking cool. I was just like, yes baby, dude, rock the fro all day if you want, I like it. And of course it showcased that he really wanted to understand float, so when it came through he would have a grasp of it. So that was one of the main reasons why he was training with Uraraka and stuff like that. That was one of the main key purposes, and it was very noted that yeah, he wanted to understand that. And also All Might was pushing that, yo, you should get a grasp of this, because this training took place at the point where Aizawa went off and he was talking to, you know, his former friend Oboro or whatnot. So this was at that particular point. Again, they're trying to squeeze things in, and I like that. You know, not to shade One Piece or anything, but one of the things you could argue about One Piece, out of the very small minuscule stuff that you could criticize it, is the fact that like Luffy's gear second, you never seen the training for that. It was never really showcased all that much. So the fact that we're getting these in there, you could argue maybe they're wedging it in just to showcase it, but I prefer it. I prefer to see that, so it doesn't just feel like, oh shit, you know, like what we talked about earlier of how he's just mastering all these quirks out of nowhere when he struggled with the first one. Like, yeah, show us more of these moments. And the conversation between All Might and Bakugo, I felt was one of the most pivotal points of this chapter, because aside from what I've been saying that, yeah, that was to showcase him training, to show that when the float quirk comes up, that is not just random him being able to control it, but the other side of one of the major points of this chapter that I felt, and you could argue there's even two pieces to this, is one, the character development for Bakugo. The conversation that he has with All Might, where he's telling him like, you're not going to be able to fool everybody forever with this. Eventually the cat's going to come out the bag, like it was different with super strength, but now, like, you know, this is Matt's quirks. To be honest with you, I thought the cat would have been out the bag by Black Whip. Like, okay, you know, super strength is like, you could argue, hey, it's just super strength and his body is nimble, so he breaks down or whatever. Like, fine, fair enough. But once you start, like, he got a whip, and then now, you know, he's floating and shit like that. All Might could try to rationalize, yeah, but if we train with float, it won't pop out of nowhere like with the whip. And I'm not telling people past the Black Whip quirk any more information, but I'm just like, fam, eventually they're gonna come out, especially once we have all of these quirks. Like, okay, the third one, float, and it's like, what, you're gonna be saying, hey, I got Uraraka with me, or I'm just kicking really high to float up in the air? Like, people are gonna find out All Might. Like, you could stop that shit. He's becoming Superman day by day. But one of the darker parts of the reasoning again behind this chapter is when Bakugo says, yo, why did you only give, out of like all the quirks that you had information, you gave half-ass explanation and detail behind the fourth quirk. And then when I asked you about it, you pretty much like brushed it off and didn't really get into it. And one of the things, because All Might is like, I don't want to jump to conclusions and give out misinformation, is what he was basically saying. Shortly into that conversation, they basically start agreeing that like, yo, Deku, he'll do whatever and not think of himself, right? That he doesn't really care about himself as long as he can save people. What if there's a huge possibility that that quirk that they were referring to, that there's a cost, possibly whether it be that there's something that can't be healed back. Let's just say that that quirk that, you know, All Might maybe has a suspicion exactly what it does is that there's a cost to his lifespan or something along those lines. And that could be one of the foreboding things of like this whole chapter. I mean, the way the chapter ended and everything was basically saying like Deku just will throw himself in harm's way and not care about the repercussions to himself as long as he can save people. And don't get me wrong, that's really heroic. I'll save people at all costs, but if it's at the cost of yourself, then you can't save the next person. So definitely I felt as though this was foreshadowing something really dark to come for Deku with whatever it has to do with that quirk that All Might didn't give all the information on. And then the last big piece of like that flashback at the very least was Bakugo admitting essentially that he bullied him. He bullied him out of his own insecurities, essentially admitting that he was a bully to Deku. Like, this is coming a long way. And mind you, the very next chapter he might call him shithead. He might say, hey, shit eater or whatever, and possibly still come across as like he's bullying him. But at the very least, when it's on a cognizant level and he's sitting down in his quietest moments or he's talking to people that he trusts, he can recognize that, and he's toned it down a lot. Like, he's not just bullying him for no reason. Like, back in the day, Deku could be sitting there drawing a paper and he'd be like, Deku, you fucking piece of shit, how dare you? So it's a little bit of a difference now from back then of like, yeah, now he'll just bully him of like, hey, you piece of shit, let's see who could beat the guy first, things like that, which not really bullying, is more so like a aggressive rivalry essentially. And the fact that he's trying to atone for the bullying that he did to Deku all those years ago by helping him now, helping him with the training, helping him go through all of this, you know, one for all and stuff like that. That's really big character development for Bakugo. People criticize Bakugo and say he was a bully, you know, this and that. And I think Horikoshi little by little is trying to shed that idea about Bakugo that he was just a mean asshole. And like, yeah, he understands now and he's trying to atone for the fucked up things he did to Deku by helping him by any means. And I love the comparison that All Might said. He's like, yo, I told you before you're kind of like Endeavor, but I didn't just mean that like y'all both assholes, which to be fair, they are both assholes, but it's more so like it took their MC that they're, you know, rivaling with, like, you know, Endeavor was rivaling against All Might and Bakugo against Deku essentially, but it took something really bad happening to them in order for them to sit down and really assess like, yo, what the fuck am I doing? You know what I'm saying? Like, it took All Might getting knocked out of the arena essentially and losing his powers for Endeavor to finally say, holy shit, let me step back. And it took Bakugo seeing all the struggles and possible potential costs that is going to come to Deku from One for All for him to say, yo, I've been bullying this dude and look like he's a righteous dude, I'm wrong. So it is interesting that, yeah, he's an asshole, but they're also similar in the way that they're flipping and turning around. And the difference is it took Endeavor to be a grown-ass man and destroy his family to do that. Bakugo's doing it as a young, you know, kid. So he's doing better than Endeavor did at the very least. And then we cut back to the fight. Shigaraki and Deku are throwing down. And while Shigaraki is still healing from the blows, they are actually taking some damage into him because he's healing a little bit slower. So Deku, like, he's kicking ass in a way and he's gaining some ground. And again, a lot of that I got to attribute to the fact that, to be honest with you, it's that Shigaraki incomplete. Remember, he came out of that chamber 75, 76%, however much it was, but he's like still nowhere complete. So yeah, there's going to be some drawbacks to Shigaraki and how much he can do. So while, yeah, Deku is noticing like, damn, he keeps on healing, it's going a little bit slower, but then also Deku already messed up one of his hands. So again, that's another good thing to add, that Deku incomplete. He ain't perfect by any means. Like, he doesn't have the complete control of the Black Whip. He just now got float, even though he trained with Uraraka. He's still got to figure that out. And then the super strength, he's smashing up his arm still. Like, you know, using 100% against this dude blew out his left arm. So right now he's fighting with a right arm and shakiness on some of his quirks that he has. So it's definitely getting very intense, but at the very least, we're seeing that Shigaraki is somewhat slowing down and taking some damage. And again, going back into that darkness, because Deku says, yo, One for All was meant to take out All for One. That's like, you know, a destined thing. This is what I'm here to do, and I'm gonna do it no matter the cost to me, which goes back into that quirk, which goes back into the conversation that All Might have with Bakugo, the drawbacks to what Deku is doing, and that that he'll sacrifice himself and something really bad could happen to Deku because he's being selfless. So very, very dark and foreshadowing for Deku, but overall, very, very awesome chapter. Very great chapter for Deku's development. Very dark chapter for what could happen, the foreshadowing for him. Very great chapter in terms of Bakugo's character development and admitting what he's done and how he's trying to atone at this particular point. Like, a lot of really big key points in this chapter. Curious what you guys think about this though. For starters, how do you figure this whole fight is going to end now that it's slowly coming down to the wire, where Shigaraki is getting slower and slower at healing and Deku blew out one of his arms? Also, what do you think about Bakugo's character at this point? The fact that he's admitting these things, the fact that he's trying to atone, actively saying, yeah, this is why I'm helping him out. If I gotta give that boy the Afro strength by blowing him around and shit like that, I'm gonna do that. And what do you think could be the cost to this quirk that All Might didn't want to give the details because he didn't want to jump to conclusions? Like, so many questions, but yeah, it seems as though we're getting down to the wire with this battle, and the war against Shigaraki might be coming to a close. That is until, you know, Giganto Makia shows up, then it's all fair game, fam. And your overall thoughts and expectations for the My Hero Academia manga with chapter 285 and beyond? Yeah, the war is coming to a close pretty soon, I'm imagining. But that's all I have for this one. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If you liked anything I had to say or enjoyed the video, drop me a like. I'd greatly appreciate it. And if you want more from me, make sure to subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram. Hit that bell to get all notifications. And if you want to follow any of my other social media, links in the description below. I'm ForneverWorld, and as always, people, have an awesome day. And remember the golden rule: anime and manga for life, boy! Have an awesome day. Peace in.
It's nights like this, and times like this,
What's that?
that I can give another hit. But I've got this inside a switch, a natural